All right, so we've now got a 2-to-1 SPR with a condensed out of position and a linear in position. So out of position's got queens through sixes, in position's got aces through fours. Same board, 2-to-1 SPR now. So 200 chips in the middle. Oh, sorry, 200 chips in the stack, 100 chips in the middle. And again, all bet sizes enabled. Okay, so we can go ahead and take a quick look at the out of position strategy. Put your thoughts down. What do you think is going to happen? What kind of behavior are we expecting? Of course, this is in a kind of like classic language. We would say that the in position players got the nut advantage. They've got the polarization advantage, like that type of language. They've got aces and kings and fives and fours. That advantage means a lot. How does it affect the behavior of the out of position player? Okay, pause it. Cool. All right. Out of position is going to check a lot. That's what's going to happen. All right. So out of position is checking a lot. Again, the EV, I've talked about this in the past. The EV for out of position between betting very small, like 10%, and checking is very similar. If you check, you're essentially betting zero. Your opponent has all bet sizing options available to him. He can shove, he can bet pot, he can bet half pot, he can bet whatever, right? So if you bet 10, your opponent could still make it to the exact same sizing choices that he could make it if you checked. So checking is like betting zero. And so betting, 10% of pot and betting zero are very, very, very comparable actions. But betting 10% is a sizing choice that you're going to see in the metagame more and more, I think, in online tournaments, particularly high stakes. So I do want to include it in the model. But the cliffs are still the same. Like this range basically just checks. This range, which has the nut disadvantage, does not want to do a lot of betting. You can see the hand the hand profile that would want to bet is still the type of hand profile that gets a lot of value if it bets really small, but doesn't particularly like check raising or anything even close to that. Yeah, so with that, we can go ahead and take a look at the in position strategy now. Okay, so now we've got the in position betting strategy, and I think very predictable behavior. In position is shoving aces and kings. Yes, it's for 2x pot. No, it doesn't matter. These two combos are the nuts. They are missing from the out of position player's range, which means that they always win. And so these combos, I've talked about this before. One of the ways to think about it is like doing a carve out. That's language I've used before, where essentially you carve these hands out of your range. And if you carve aces, kings, and fives and fours out of your range, you're left with a symmetric range, which is queens through sixes. So you've got almost two ranges. You've got this polarized range, and then of aces, kings, fives, and fours, and then you've got this symmetric range, which is of course queens through sixes. Our opponent doesn't do very much betting in this instance. There's a little bit with the 10% size, but our opponent doesn't do much betting. So our opponent's range is mostly intact. So our opponent's range really is, in this instance, even though they're out of position, our opponent's range really is mostly queens through sixes. So we've got, again, this very symmetric block with this very polarized block, and we can carve this polarized block out and play it to a shoving strategy. This asymmetric nutted component of our range, we can carve out, jam it. That's aces and kings, and then a fraction, obviously, of fives and fours. What's the bluff to value ratio for 2x pot? It's 40%. Why is it 40%? Again, it comes from the exact same place it always comes from. So it's our opponent's odds, essentially. So our opponent would be calling 200. The total pot after their call will be 500. Why would it be 500? 200 is their call. 200 is our bet. That's 400. The starting pot was 100. Okay, so that's 5. So 200 divided by 500 is 40%. That's going to be our bluff to value ratio. So value to bluff is 60%. Bluff to value is 40%. So that's the reason for the reason that we don't have all of the fives and fours included in the shove sizing, even though we have all of the aces and kings included in the shove sizing. It's because we, by definition, have to have a smaller fraction of bluffs. Okay, so that explains the bluff to value ratio for the 2x pot sizing choice. It kind of explains why it exists. We shove the nuts. It's irrespective of stack to pot ratio, by the way. So as we get to deeper and deeper stacks, you should be able to predict that is going to continue to show up. We're checking our kind of medium strength bluff catching type hands that have some amount of EV in the check option. So hands like sixes, which has a little bit of EV. So the EV of checking pocket sixes. Keep in mind our opponent doesn't have a bluffing range. So the EV of pocket sixes comes from splitting with pocket sixes. Okay, against the opponent, that's worth 7.5. So pocket sixes is worth some money, and that drives it towards check in this particular sim. Whereas fours and fives are obviously worth 0. They are hands that are below the opponent's range. And let's see. And after aces and kings and fives and fours, we have queens, which is still the nuts, right? So queens is the strongest hand that our opponent can show up with, which we bet all the time. But even a hand as strong as the second nuts is actually indifferent between checking and betting to various sizing choices, including half pot. So like even like, smaller sizing choices. Oh, and then I should mention is the lack of really small bet sizes, which is really important. So we are not seeing 10% bet sizing. We are not seeing 30% bet sizing. In this, we don't even see 50%. But I think it's really important to get people to get you guys the understanding that you really, as the in position player, want to be biased away from really small bets. And you can also, after you see over and over and over again these models, you can start to get really comfortable with the idea that like if you're playing against an opponent who's using a lot of 10% or 30% bet sizes in position, that's an opponent who probably doesn't understand what's going on. So, because that's not really appropriate. Yes, it can be the case that it can be good under certain conditions, but mostly it doesn't work. And hopefully that idea is coming through. So we see the in position strategy bias towards big bets. And yeah, so hopefully that explains most of what's going on as the in position player, and we can move on to the versus bet strategy. All right, so we are now going to look at the versus bet strategy. Of course, out of position is again just basically checking range, so not super interesting, nothing to really investigate there. For in position, with out of position doing so much checking. So we're just going to look at the out of position versus bet strategy, and we're going to focus on the jam because that's primarily what's going on here. So yeah, let's go ahead and take a quick look at out of positions versus jam. So before we do that though, you should expect what kind of fold percentage, right? Because I want you guys to kind of get predictive, right? What kind of fold percentage should we expect for out of position, right? Versus the shove. Go ahead and give it a quick second. Think about it. I'll give you the answer in a sec. I haven't looked at the sim, by the way. It's just, I don't know, math. So it's not really complicated. It gets very predictable. Okay. So, okay. So what should the fold percentage be? Fold percentage should be 67. VPIP should be 33. Where does the fold percentage come from? Risk reward on the bet. So we're going to jam for 200. The total pot after our jam will be 300. 200 divided by 300 is 0.67. 0.67 is going to be the fold percentage. 0.33 is going to be the VPIP percentage. So that's going to be how I expect things to work here. Approximately speaking, that's where we're at. So very nice. And what's that mean? What's that look like? Well, if we jam, if you recall, the shoving range is aces, kings, and queens, and the bluffs are fives and fours. So that means that aces, kings, and queens, which this range lacks aces and kings, but queens is going to be, again, a part of the value shoving component. So that hand is going to be a fully weighted call. Fives and fours are where the bluffs come from. There's no bluffing with sixes. So we might have expected sixes through jacks to be indifferent, but here it looks like, so sixes is still indifferent. It's still worth 0 when it calls. It doesn't lose money. So sixes is worth the same amount of money as sevens. You can see here, sixes, sevens, eights, nines, tens, and jacks. They all have identical EVs. Okay. Yes, it's true. There's this there's this calling behavior pattern where it calls from the top down. It calls with jacks more than tens, more than nines, more than eights, more than sevens. That's pretty reasonable. But you can see that the EV of those calls, how much those calls are actually worth, is actually identical. Those calls are all worth the same amount of money. And that's, of course, because the opponent's jamming aces, kings, and queens, and fives and fours. So these hands all beat and lose to the exact same hands. They all beat bluffs. They all lose to value bets. So the EV is, of course, the same. Even if the calling pattern is different, they are worth the same amount of money. And it's just calling from the top down, which is a reasonable strategy. I think there's no reason to call in the reverse order. So, I think that we can go ahead and call this one here. And hopefully this is making a lot of sense to you guys and you're finding it all very helpful. So cheers, guys.